this video is quite important. I mean, all videos are important and all the dot points are important, but this dot point is probably specifically important because they love taking 7-mark or 6-mark questions that are related to this dot point, because we're talking about cochlea and hearing aids, and they seem to love taking really high mark questions from this dot point. So we'll cover it in some detail. First, we'll talk about hearing loss and what kind of hearing losses that exist. There's something called conductive hearing loss, which affects the middle ear or outer ear. So if there is a problem with the middle or the outer ear, which would be the pinna, the auditory canal, the tympanic membrane, or the ossicles. So for example, if there's a blockage here in the auditory canal, wax being blocking the area, or if there is a rupture in the tympanic membrane, this was the tympanic membrane, you can see there's a rupture here, or if the ossicles, these different little bones, if they're broken or damaged, right? These bones are tiny and they're quite fragile. If you've got loud sound, you could damage parts of it, and that would affect your hearing. So if there's a problem with any of those different structures, then we've got conductive hearing loss. Conductive, so that means conduction. So conduction means traveling from one point to the other point. In this case, we're having conductive loss of the sound traveling from one point to the other point. So usually sound would travel through the ear, it would hit the membrane would vibrate, it would activate the actual ossicles, and then the ossicles would activate the cochlea, right? So if there's a problem with the conduction of any of those points, of the actual sound towards the cochlea, that's what we call conductive hearing loss. So that's to do with middle or the outer ear. And then there's called a sensorineural hearing loss, so sensorineural hearing loss, and that's to do with the cochlea or the inner ear. So this is to do with the inner ear. And there's two parts to it. There's senso and then the neural. Senso means sensory. So we said that we have these hair in the organ of Corti, we have these hair, and attached to these hair we've got the actual nerves, right? So usually this hair will vibrate, so they will sense the change. This is where sense happens, at the hair. Brown thing is meant to be the hair. And then after it's sensed the actual change, or the stimulus, then we have the actual nervous impulse being sent via the neurons, or the nerves that are attached to the hair. So these nervous impulses will travel past to the brain, to the auditory nerve, and then to the brain. So if there's a sensorineural hearing loss, then we have either a problem with the sensory part, so either a problem with the hair itself, maybe it might not move fast enough or quick enough, or there's a part with the neural part, so a problem with the actual neuron that attaches to the hair. So either those two things are affected. That's what we call sensorineural hearing loss, and that's to do with the cochlea and the organ of Corti. This here are your normal hair. This is how they would usually look like in your organ of Corti, and this is when they're damaged. And they get damaged by, for example, loud chronic noise. So loud noise, but it has to be chronic, so it has to be over long periods of time. It could be due to age, that's a big one as well. It could be due to disease, right? So all these are examples where the hair inside the organ of Corti could be damaged. So I'm mentioning all this because we're talking about the cochlea and the hearing loss, the hearing aids. So first of all, what are these technologies, and when are these technologies useful? So I'll quickly go over when they're useful, and then I'll explain what they actually are. So hearing aids are useful, for example, if we've got conductive hearing loss. Remember, that was a problem with either the outer or the middle ear. But in most cases, if we have conductive hearing loss, we'll actually grab surgery. So surgery will be, not hearing aids, but surgery will be a quite common way that we remove conductive hearing loss, but hearing aids can help as well. Then sensorineural hearing loss. So if we have some sensorineural, not complete loss of the sensorineural part, but some loss of the sensorineural part, then we can also use the hearing aids. So if the actual hair, so this is again, these are the hair, you can see the hair here, this is the sensory part, and then those neurons attached to it, this would be the actual neural part. So blue is neural and yellow is sensory. If either of those parts is damaged, only a bit damaged, so not completely gone, but somewhat damaged, then we can use, actually wait, so for the hearing aids, if the sensory part, so if this part is damaged, slightly damaged. So if the hair are slightly damaged, we can use hearing aids. If the auditory parts, this nerve part is damaged, then we've got problems. Then we can't use hearing aids. So only if the damage goes to the hair, and only if it's slightly damaged, not completely damaged. We can use it in children and adults. And those children and adults must have some residual hearing. So what that means is they can't be completely deaf. Deaf means that they can't hear at all. That's when the cochlear implant comes into play. So deafness would not be good. We wouldn't give people hearing aids if they're deaf. They have to have some level of hearing, maybe just bad hearing, but at least have to have some level of hearing. Right? So what is hearing aids? What are they? So at the moment we're covering different parts. We're covering, the stop point says cochlear implants need to evaluate the hearing aid and a cochlear implant in terms of position and type of energy transfer. So that's two things. Conditions under which these technologies will assist hearing. So this is what we're covering at the moment. So that's what we covered just now, when they're actually useful. And we're covering a bit about how they actually work as well. Even though you don't really need to know this for the dot point, you don't need to explain how it works, but I will show you like the one part of the actual dot point says that it'd be good for you to know how it works, because then that will help you explain the part that you do require it to have to do, which is talking about the types of energy transfer that occur. But how it works is we've got this is the actual hearing aid, right? So we have this device, and we position that in the back of the ear, and you've probably seen people with hearing aids. And then we have a ear mold, which will connect to the auditory canal, the ear canal. Right? So this is meant to be the same thing. The gray part has two parts in it. Actually, it has a couple of parts. The gray part has a microphone, an amplifier, and a speaker in it. And then that connects via this ear mold, connects to the auditory canal, right? So this is our pinna here, the outside of the ear. What the microphone does, the microphone picks up a signal. So if you have sound coming from outside, so it picks up sound. If you've got sound coming up from the outside, so from here somewhere, it would pick up that sound, and then it would go to the amplifier. The amplifier makes the sound louder, so it increases, so it ups the volume. So plus volume, it makes it louder, right? And then what happens is that signal gets sent to the speaker, which is this part here, which would be in that side that here. And the speaker will make it into an electrical impulse. Right? So this will make it into an electrical impulse and send it to the actual ear mold. And that's when we have sound being pushed into our auditory canal. So point of this is, this person can still hear this normal function is still there, but usually the sound would be too low for him to be able to pick it up properly. So using this hearing aid, we can get the sound from outside and just amplify it, so pick up the volume, make it louder, and that will help that person to hear properly, right? Because now the whole thing happens. The louder sound will activate the tympanic membrane. Tympanic membrane will activate the ossicles. The ossicles will activate the cochlea, and then the louder sound now travels to the organ of Corti, which are these here. This loud vibrations has caused that water to be quite aggressive in terms of its movement, high pressure. And high pressure is enough to be able to stimulate these sensory hair. If without the hearing aid, the actual pressure might not be high enough. It might not be forceful enough to be able to move it properly, right? But because of the hearing aid, even if those hair don't move or aren't perfectly the way they should be, that increase in volume will make it still move as it should. So it will make it move, and you'll hear a bit more. It'll basically be amplified a bit. And then after the sensory part is activated, the signal gets sent via these neurons towards the auditory nerve and then to the brain itself, right? So hearing aids are useful for people who have some hearing loss, because it will amplify the signal and then it will make things work as they should. Whereas a cochlear implant is a bit different. It only helps in sensory neural hearing loss, and it's useful for children and adults, just as hearing aids are, but it's used for complete deafness, as opposed to hearing aids, which is used if you still have some hearing. And it's either if you have complete deafness that you're born with, so if you can't hear once you're already born with it, so basically you've never been able to hear, or if it's acquired, for example, because of old age or because of disease. Sometimes you lose your hearing because of that. In both those examples, we can give them the cochlear implant. The cochlear implant is a bit different because it has similar features. So it has a microphone and a speech processor. The microphone will be the thing that picks up the signal. This gray thing here will have the microphone, and that will pick up the signal. That's what a microphone does, pick up the sound. And the speech processor will change that sound into an electrical impulse. So the electrical impulse will be done by the speech processor. That will then be sent to something called a transmitter coil. So that signal, the electrical signal, will be sent towards a transmitter coil, which is actually here. So this actual processor and the microphone are on the ear or close to the ear, and then this electrical, so the transmitter coil is right there. It's on the actual side of the skull behind the ear. So we have that signal being sent to that skull part, which is a transmitter coil, and it will send a signal to something inside our actual brain. So a surgery must have happened, and this part would have been implanted right behind this actual transmitter coil. So in the skull behind it. This is called, we call it the implanted package. And this is what will decode the message it gets from the transmitter coil, and it will decide what to do. So the message it received from the transmitter coil, it will decode what it has to do with it, and then it will send a signal on to 24 electrodes, or different amount of electrodes depending on the actual technology, but in many cases it's about 20. And those 24 electrodes will then actually completely activate these nerves, right? So in this case, when it comes to cochlear implant, that is given when these sensory parts, so when the hair part, when they're not working at all anymore. So they're not moving at all, they're broken, maybe due to old age disease, right? So these are not working at all. So what this actual whole technology does is it activates these nerve fibers directly, right? So without having this hair activate them, this technology will activate them directly through this use of these electrodes. So sound is interpreted, is picked up from the outside, is sent into an electrical signal, sent to the transmitter coil. The transmitter coil sends it to the implanted package inside the skull. The implanted package will then decode that message and send an electrical impulse towards the electrodes, and the electrodes will then stimulate the actual nerve part of the organ of Corti, and then you hear something, right? So, and depending on how many electrodes are activated, we can tell what kind of pitch and sound it has. So for example, if all of them are activated, you hear maybe a high pitch, or if only a few of them are activated, you hear a lower pitch. Just an example. I'm actually not sure if it's exactly that way around, but it'd be the basically what I'm saying is depending on how many electrodes are activated, that changes the pitch. So that was basically how these two technologies are used and what they're good for, but we're not done yet. We still have to do a couple of things. So you can tell there's quite a bit to this top point, because now I'm going to talk about the positioning, which I've already done a bit, and the types of energy transfers. The positioning is quite simple. It just refers to where these different parts are. And with the hearing aid, so the first part is a hearing aid. All we have is a headset. Remember, the headset had the microphone and the amplifier and the speaker in it. Headset is located, it can be either behind the ear, they can locate it inside the ear, or actually deep inside the ear canal. So nowadays there's different technologies, so we have different ways, but the one we might stick with would be the behind the ear one. But if you get a question, you can say there's different ways you can do it, but you choose the behind the ear way. So we've got the actual headset behind the ear, and then the ear mold will be the part that is inside the ear, and that's where the sound will come out of. And then remember, we've got these different parts. We've got the amplifier, the microphone, the speaker. We also have batteries, so this whole thing is battery charge, and the battery means that you have to replace these batteries. Now, in terms of what kind of changes there are, well, sound comes, right? So sound will come towards the ear. Sound comes towards the ear. And then the sound is picked up by the microphone. So the microphone will pick up the sound, and here we have sound energy. That sound energy is then changed into electrical energy. This happens whilst it's moving to the amplifier, right? So it's changed from sound energy into electrical energy whilst it's moving towards the amplifier. And the amplifier is the thing that will increase the volume, it will make it louder. Right? And so the amplifier will make it a louder, and then the signal will be sent back to the speaker, and the speaker will produce a new sound which is louder than the original sound, right? So we've had the sound being picked up by the microphone, then changed into electrical energy or electrical impulse that's sent to the amplifier. The amplifier ups that sound, but then ups the energy of that signal, but then sends that signal back to the speaker this time. The speaker will make that sound louder because the signal is now louder because the amplifier has made it louder. So what comes out is a louder signal, and then it moves the way it would usually move, right? So through the ear canal, so I'm going to use this image here, through the ear canal it would then move, then it would activate the tympanic membrane and the ear ossicles and the cochlea, and then it will affect the pressure, so the fluid pressure, and all that is still mechanical. So after it goes from sound energy, once it hits the tympanic membrane, it changes into mechanical energy, and it stays mechanical energy until it activates the sensory neurons. Until it activates the hair follicles, the sensory hairs, and then changes it into electrochemical energy. So basically, for this part, because we're talking about right now the position and type of energy transfer. So position is just where it's found, and then the type of energy transfer is how it changes from sound to electrical to louder sound to mechanical to electrochemical. This would be the change in sound, which is why it's good for you to know how it works roughly. So this part will be easy to remember, the changing in the sound. And in terms of this, so that was the hearing aid, right? And then the cochlear implant works a bit different. Remember, in terms of where this stuff can be found, the headset and the microphone can be found either behind the ear or just above the ear, and that would be the headset and the microphone. The transmitter coil can be found on the back of the head, right? So that's this part here, behind the ear, on the back, on the actual head itself. Then the implanted package is actually exact opposite, so it's the same spot as the transmitter coil, but it's just on the other side of the skull. So it's actually inside the skull. This is where the transmitter coil is, whereas that is where the transmitter coil is. So it's just adjacent, just opposite of it, but there's the skull in between, right? So that's where the actual implant package is. And then the electrodes connect directly to the actual cochlea. And this is another example of how you can see how these electrodes that come out of this implanted package, how they actually go inside the cochlea, and there'll be 24 electrodes, and it will activate these different parts. But because it's 24 electrodes compared to our thousands of hair follicles, which will usually be there, it actually changes the sound. So if you have a cochlear implant, it doesn't sound like a normal human voice or normal sounds. The sounds will change. You can still hear something, but it will be different because we have a different amount of switching off and on of these auditory nerves. But you can still hear sound, but it's going to be different. Right, so that was the first part, the position of these, right? And then we have to also talk about the energy transfer. So first we have sound coming in. So sound will come in, and sound will hit the microphone, right? So sound is picked up by the microphone, and then the microphone changes the signal into electrical signal and sends it to the processor, the word processor, right? So it goes from microphone, changes from sound to electrical at the microphone, then it's being sent on to the word processor. This is where basically it will decide how many impulses it will need. So it decodes a whole language and makes it into something that it can make into an electrical impulse. Then it goes from the word processor to the transmission coil, and then from the transmission coil to the receiver stimulator, or another word for it is the implanted package on the other side. All this is when it's all electrical. So all this is electrical, and then it will travel towards the actual ear. So it bypasses the all of these different parts, and then it will bypass the fluid as well, and it will go straight. So these electrodes go straight for the actual nerve. So if the hairs are there and the nerves are there, these implants will hook on straight to some of these nerves, especially when it's a bundle. So there's no mechanical energy at all. So that's why there's no mechanical, because the fluid doesn't do anything. The cochlea doesn't do anything. Sorry, the cochlea does do anything, but the tympanic membrane, the ossicles, they don't do anything. It's just sound, initially sound. Then the microphone picks up, changes in electrical. Then it travels through the whole system as electrical energy until it stimulates the actual nerves, which the electrodes do. and then it changes into electrochemical energy as the nerve impulse is sent towards the brain. Right, so just sound, electrical, and electrochemical, but you should also know kind of where these different parts happen, right? So sound happens in the microphone, then the rest of the whole circuit part is electrical, and then once it gets to the hair follicles, that's when it's electrochemical. Next part and last part is we need to talk about limitations of each technology, because whilst these technologies are good, they're useful, they're not perfect, they don't completely reduce hearing loss, it just helps. Right, so there's some good things and some bad, not so good things. Right, so with hearing aid, the good thing is there are no side effects and it's relatively inexpensive. So there's no side effects, there's no surgery, there's no bigger complications, and it's relatively inexpensive. One problem is that background noise is amplified. So for example, if you hear the static psh, you can imagine it'd be some sounds which would just be there and they shouldn't be there, but they're just louder than they should be. So you hear these random sounds, which could be quite annoying. So that could be for hearing aids. There's a limited distance, so it only works about 3 meters. So you need to go really close to someone who's got an hearing aid for them to hear it properly. So that's a limitation, right? So limitation means how obstacles or what are the problems when it comes to this technology. So you only need, it only works at best at 3 meters. Actually, it works very best at 1 meter. And it still works okay at 3 meters. That's the limitation as well. It can be used well at any age, which is an advantage. There's no learning involved. You can just pop it in and you'll hear better. So that's good. It still requires lip reading because it's not perfect, right? So whilst it makes your hearing a bit better, you often still require lip reading to make sure you can actually still hear or just function properly. And one problem is when there's damage to the auditory nerve, that's going to be problematic, because we said earlier that all the hearing aid does is it makes sure that this hair can still move as it should. Right? With old age, his hair might not move properly, and louder sound will make it move better. But if there's damage to the auditory nerve, then even if this thing moves, it's completely pointless. So only thing that this compensates is if the hair is damaged, not if the nerve is damaged. So that's for the hearing aid. So you should actually, probably this table and maybe some more information that you have, you should write that down, because fair chance there's going to be a question about this, and it'll be worth quite a few marks. The Cochlear Implant. So the Cochlear Implant, one of the limitations, it's very expensive, and there's ongoing costs, which means it's not just a one-off surgery, but you have to keep paying, because it's just, you put stuff in your skull, it's going to be kind of hard to make that not expensive. Get checked up and all that kind of stuff. The sounds are not natural, as I said earlier, because there's these 24 electrodes which will activate different types of nerves. It's going to be different to your normal kind of hearing, which relies on thousands or probably even tens of and hundreds of thousands of these small little hairs. So it's going to be a difference in sound, and that means you have to learn these new sounds. So speech, if someone talks to you, you have to actually learn these new sounds and what they might mean, because everything will sound a bit different. So you can't just pop it on and just, it's going to be perfect. It's going to be easy for you to understand people. Surgery, again, you require surgery, and obviously with surgery there's going to be complications. There's going to be side effects. There's going to be problems. Most people don't like to get surgery. Distance is also limited. Again, distance in this case is about 15 meters, 15. And for normal kind of hearing and speaking, obviously 15 meters is not too. You can yell and I can hear you from 100 or 500 meters if you yell loud enough. So 50 meters isn't that far. Another problem is the background noise is amplified. Again, that's maybe the whole shh. You might have a random sound which might be a bit annoying. It still requires lip reading, because again, whilst it gives you better hearing, it's not perfect, and it might even change the actual type of sounds you get. And again, there are side effects as well. So this table would be useful to note down, and this only answers one part of the actual dot point. Remember, there's quite a few parts. Limitations was what we just discussed now. And you might get a question like, what are the benefits and limitations of hearing aids and cochlear implants, and what can be done for people who have hearing loss? Something like that, but that could be like a 5, 6, 7 mark question. And you should also know, because dot point says, you need to know where these different technologies are positioned. So that refers to the actual positioning of them, right? So where these different parts are positioned, and the energy transfer as well. So that would be, in this case, for the actual hearing aid, it's from sound to electrical energy to louder sound to mechanical to electrochemical. whereas with the other one is from sound to electrochemical, right? So you need to know that part as well. And you also need to know under which conditions they're useful. So this was the whole part of the idea of for hearing aids, if you've got some conductive hearing loss, hearing aids could be useful, but surgery would probably be better. And then if you've got sensory neural hearing loss, but it's only a bit of loss, so you don't have complete loss, you can use hearing aids. Children and adults can use it, but you must have some residual hearing. So if you're deaf, you cannot use hearing aids. It's not going to work. Whereas a cochlear implant, it's only useful for sensory neural hearing loss. It can be used for children and adults, but it's used for people who have complete deafness. So that if they're either born deaf or if it's been acquired because of old age or disease, then cochlear implant would be the right choice. So hope that was useful, but yeah, I would definitely suggest have a good understanding of this dot point because there's a fair chance it might be in the exam.